Hey friends, it's LaRue with the blog wagonwheelhomestead.com. Welcome back to my channel. It is springtime. It's March, early spring here on the homestead. That means a couple of things. One, we're gonna soon be planting our garden. In April and May, we grow a half-acre market garden, which means we're gonna be extremely busy during the summer months. And it also means that I have an overabundance of eggs. I feel very blessed to be getting eggs from my in-laws. I don't actually have chickens, which is funny. I have all the other homestead things and we may get chickens in the future. But right now I don't have chickens, but they have extra eggs and I have an overabundance of eggs. And so one thing I like to do this time of year is make a whole bunch of sourdough pasta and dry it so that I have it for easy meals all summer long. So I don't mind mixing up sourdough pasta early in the week and then rolling it out when I'm going to make spaghetti or some kind of pasta or running it through my pasta machine. But when I come in from the garden and I just need a really fast meal, it's very nice if the pasta is already made. So we're gonna make a whole bunch of pasta. It's a great way to preserve your eggs. And we're gonna dehydrate it in the dehydrator and then store it in our pantry. It will keep for up to a year and we'll eat it long before then. But anyway, I'm gonna get rid of a bunch of these eggs. And so what I did yesterday is I fed a bunch of sourdough starter. I just fed it a whole bunch of flour and water and let it rise and fall and become what some may call discard. Okay, except that we never discard, but that is what it's typically called. And we're gonna use this sourdough discard, eggs and flour to make pasta. Once you've had fresh pasta, you will never wanna go back to buying pasta and it's so inexpensive to make it yourself. I'm gonna use my little pasta machine, dry it in the dehydrator. It's gonna be super simple. I'll be working on this throughout the day and I'll take you along with me. It is gonna make a big flour mess, which is why I like to just do this all in one day and not have the mess of rolling it out several times throughout the summer. So come along and let's get started. First thing I'm going to do is set up my Bosch mixer. You can mix this by hand, but I like to use my Bosch to save my muscles whenever possible. So that's what I'm going to use. I may have to finish kneading it by hand because you want it to be really thick with a lot of flour, but we're going to at least get started with the Bosch and let it do a bunch of the work for us. I'm going to add my dough hook, and this is a neat little piece that keeps the dough from sticking to the middle. I'll put a link for my Bosch mixer in the description box below. It's one of the best investments I think that you can make in your kitchen because you can quickly make bread and so many things with your Bosch. All right, we're gonna mix up 3 batches of our pasta dough at a time in here. And so for 3 batches, I need 18 eggs. And you can find this recipe on the blog, wagonwheelhomestead.com. Then we're going to need 4½ cups of sourdough starter or discard. So I'm just going to pour this in here and I'm going to leave just the remnants in the bottom of the jar because I'm going to feed this again because I want to make a sourdough focaccia later. So I'm just going to add flour and water to that, and a little bit on the edge of the jar will be more than enough to get that going again. All right, 4½ cups. So this is a 4-cup measuring cup. And so I'm just gonna guess on the half because again, we're gonna add flour until the consistency is right. So I'm just gonna go a little bit above till I think it looks like 4½ cups. Adding this to the mixer. And I'm just going to turn it on and give it a quick stir. I am going to add a little bit of salt. This is optional. It's actually not in the recipe on the blog. You don't have to add the salt. I just like to give my pasta a little extra salt. And then I'm going to start letting it mix while I add the flour. And I'm going to be adding 4 to 4.5 cups of flour per batch, and this is 3 batches. So we'll probably start with like 13 or 14 cups of flour, and then we're gonna see how this is. And again, we may have to finish kneading it by hand because it's gonna be a super stiff dough. We definitely don't want it to be sticky. Okay, let's try that. And it's not that the mixer won't mix it when it gets super thick, it's that sometimes when you put the flour in, it just continues to go around and around. If you leave it long enough, it does, it does mix it, but we may have to do a little bit of work by hand, but it actually feels pretty good. You don't want it to be sticky, you want it to feel like Play-Doh. So let's dump it out on the counter and see what it feels like. This was exactly 14 cups of flour that I added for 3 batches. And exactly how much you add depends on how hydrated your sourdough starter was, how big your eggs were, right? That's why you sort of have to be willing to add a little more or less flour. And if you add a little too much flour, you can add either another part of an egg or you can add just a little tiny bit of water. So it's all fine. I'm just gonna get my hands in this dough, see what it feels like. It actually feels really good. I'm just gonna get it really smooth. You want it to feel like, it needs to be like homemade Play-Doh, if you've ever made homemade Play-Doh. And then we're gonna let it set for a couple of hours and rest. Let the gluten fully develop. Then we're gonna start rolling out the pasta, which is the fun part. Okay, I'll show you what this is like. It's just beautiful, soft, but not sticky dough. And I just used regular all-purpose flour. You can use semolina, which is more traditionally what they would use in the pasta that you get from the grocery store. But all-purpose flour is what I had today. That's what I use. So I'm just gonna cover this and let it set here for a couple of hours, and then we'll work on making it into dough. This is some I made a couple days ago, and then I didn't get a chance to do anything with it. It's been in the refrigerator. You can make it up ahead of time, and it can be in the fridge. In fact, you can freeze it. If you don't want to dehydrate it, you can freeze it. I'll also show you how you can dehydrate it without a dehydrator. You can just let it sit out and dry. So if you don't have a dehydrator, I'll still show you how you can preserve this and make it shelf stable. So this dough, because of the sourdough in it, it kind of rose and got wild. Anyway, this the gluten is fully developed in this because it's had time to rest. So, but it's been in the fridge and it's cold, so I'm gonna let this come up to room temperature. And I've got just enough sourdough starter to probably make one more batch. So I'm just gonna mix up one more batch of dough, and that way I'll use as many eggs as possible and take advantage of making the flour mess all at one time. All right, it's been a couple hours, lunch is over, and I'm gonna spend my afternoon rolling pasta dough. So this is the pasta maker that I'm using now. I have used my KitchenAid pasta maker, and you've seen me use that. I've come to really love using this handmade pasta maker now that I have it. This is a Macato Atlas 150. I will link it in the description box below from Amazon. It's one of the better quality ones. Works really well. And so we're just gonna bolt it down to the counter. I'll show you that. And then you take this piece, it's a cutter, and you can see it does spaghetti over here or fettuccine over here, and you can get different cutters, right? You can get all different kinds of cutters, and it just slides right on here. So this piece just makes the long flat pieces of pasta, which you can use for lasagna, or, you know, obviously you roll it into long flat pieces and then you can roll it through here. And I'm going to show you a special trick to get it to where it will cut nicely. Okay, so we're just going to tie in and start. This is the little dial. So we start on number 1, rolling it. It's a wider setting. And then we're going to move it up to a number 3 and make the pasta sheets thinner. You know, you can roll pasta out by hand. I've done that a lot. I still do that a lot. But you don't want to have to do that for this much pasta. So it's really nice to have one of these. And I love that it's manual. You don't have to plug it in, right? This would be a great project to do on a summer day, and you could actually dry a lot of this outside. You could just cover it really lightly with a sheet, keep the flies off, and let it dry outside. So that's another good option. So this is my ball of dough that had been in the refrigerator. Now, if you're sensitive to gluten, you can make this up several days ahead of time, but at least, you know, 8 to 12 hours ahead of time, and let it sit in the refrigerator and let the sourdough starter do all of its work on the new flour that you added to the dough. And that will give you long fermented sourdough noodles, which if you're gluten intolerant, you'll probably be able to eat them just fine. A lot of people that have to be gluten-free can eat long fermented sourdough noodles, bread, all kinds of things. And so you can make your own pasta. It doesn't have to be gluten-free, and you can enjoy it that way. So if you're especially sensitive to wheat, you'll want to let it set longer than what I've let this other stuff set on the counter. And I'm going to find a spot here on my counter where I can attach this. It's just a little piece that will connect this to the counter. And then here's the handle. And what's nice about this is you can just stick it in. If you're going to want to roll the pasta sheets, you stick it in this one and just pull it out really quick, and you can stick it in these when you're ready to cut the noodles. So it's really very simple. And I'm probably just going to take this piece off for now because we're just going to be making the long sheets to begin with. So I'll get my handle all put in here so it locks. And what I'm going to do is just start pinching off pieces of dough. And the trick is, this is why we're going to end up with a lot of flour on the counter. I actually just got my big bucket of flour out here. And we're just going to, you want to flour them well so that they don't stick. So I'm just going to start pinching off pieces of dough about like that, throwing them in the pile. And you'll get a feel for how big or small you want these. You can also use a bench scraper to cut these off. Okay, just gonna kind of, you know, roll them in flour, and then we're gonna roll them in flour again here in a minute. So then what I'm gonna do is just sort of flatten it out just a little bit. I have this set on 1. And I'm just going to stick it in here and roll it through. Okay, and there's the first piece. And I'm going to put some more flour over here. Again, we're going to end up with flour all over, so be prepared. And we're just going to lay this in flour and set it off to the side until we're ready to do the next step. This is a great time to get your kids involved. But my kids, it's actually turned out to be a pretty decent day. They're all busy outside helping their dad. And this is Sunday. We don't have school, so it's all right. I'll just do this right quick. And let me tell you, tomorrow's me, or the summertime me, will thank today's me for doing this. I actually think this is faster than using my KitchenAid pasta maker because you can really control what happens with the dough. You can speed it up or slow it down, just depending. Sometimes doing things by hand is actually the fastest way. Okay, my thing slipped a little bit. Might have to adjust it. All right. And I'm going to get just a little bit more flour here. Don't be afraid to add plenty of flour. So now what I'm going to do is run these through on the number 3 setting. Pull out on this and turn it to number 3. You can go all the way up to 9. You can make super thin pasta sheets just depending on the kind of pasta that you want to make. Okay, and I'm going to roll this through. And it's going to make it a lot thinner. That's what you want. I usually start it through and grab it with my other hand. Of course, if you have several people, somebody can be running the crank, somebody can be feeding it through, and somebody can be catching it. Just depends. Now you have a couple of options. You want this to be all kind of dry, these sheets to be kind of dry before you cut the noodles. That's the trick to getting them to cut. If I tried to cut them right now, they wouldn't cut very well. So what we're going to do is a trick that I learned from my friend Ruth Ann Zimmerman. And if you don't follow her here on YouTube, you definitely should. If you look up Homesteading with the Zimmermans, she has an absolutely excellent channel, and I've learned a lot of things from her. And what she does is she irons these sheets. You can either let them set out for 2 or 3 hours on the counter or hang them to dry before you cut the noodles. But her family grew up old order Mennonite, and they always used their iron to dry these sheets fairly quickly, so then they could go ahead and cut them into noodles. And so that's what we're going to do today. Typically, if I'm making this for soup, I'll just put it over my pasta drying rack, which I have right here, and I can show you. This is a really nice pasta drying rack. I'll just hang it up over this. Or you can hang it over a hanger, anything like that. You want to let it dry at least 30 minutes before cooking it, because you don't want noodles to cook into mush. Obviously, we're going to dry these all the way today, but there's lots of different ways you can dry the pasta. So I have my iron, and I have it set so that it will not put any steam out, and I have it turned on low. It's kind of between low and the wool setting. You'll have to just play with it and see what setting works best for you. And I just have an old towel here on my countertop. You could use your ironing board. I just don't want to get flour all over my ironing board, so I'm just going to use this, and we're just going to iron it, and you'll feel that it will be partially cooking or drying these sheets. And what I like about doing it this way, if you leave these laying out on the counter, they don't dry on both sides very well. So sometimes you still have the bottom side that just does not cut. And so I like to dry these with the iron. And then that's what they're just a little bit more dry. And we'll cut one and see how it is. We may have to let it dry even a little more on the counter, but this definitely speeds the process along. You can run these through the machine, fold them over and run them through more than once so that you get nice square ends, but I'm not going to take the time to do that because we're doing so much today. I'm actually going to turn this up just a little bit. Because we're doing so much today, and because I don't mind if my pasta looks a little bit rustic. Like, it's all going to get broken up in the pot anyways and eaten. It doesn't have to look perfect for me, but you could do that if you want to take the time. Okay, we're gonna add our noodle cutter and we'll see if these are dry enough. I will tell you that sourdough pasta is a little bit stickier. It's just a little bit different than regular pasta. So we'll just see how it works out. Okay, and you can see how beautifully it cuts. It did a pretty good job. So I think it's ready to go ahead and cut. We'll try the spaghetti too. It's my experience that the spaghetti doesn't cut quite as well. You may need drier pasta. And so what I'm gonna do is show you how you can dry this on this pasta rack as well. I'm just gonna turn it. I'm just gonna lay, you know, one sheet's worth of pasta over this, and you can just let this set here, you know, and let it dry. It sticks some way. I can never remember how it sticks. So you can leave it here for 24 hours to dry, but obviously I can only fit so much on this pasta rack, right? Which is why we're gonna use the dehydrator. But this is one way that you can dry it. You can just let it sit here, then take it off and store it in a glass jar or something. What Ruth Ann Zimmerman does is she spreads hers out on a clean sheet, like on a bed, an unused bed, a spare bed, just spreads out all of her noodles and lets them dry that way for about 24 hours until they snap. But anyway, I'm going to show you how to do it in a dehydrator. So there's just lots of different options for how to dry your pasta. Okay, and I'm going to try the spaghetti once just to see how that goes. I actually think the spaghetti sheets could be a little thinner. I should look at the directions and see what it says spaghetti sheet should be. It still cut it fine. It really did. But you can see that it's bunched up in a few places. But it's fine. It's going to be fine. So what I'm going to do with these is I'm just going to spread it into a circle like this, into like a little nest of noodles. Just like that. And it is going to take longer to dry this way. I'm going to set it on my dehydrator sheets. It's going to take longer to dry, but it'll be easier for me to set it down into a glass jar and also to pull it out without it breaking. So I'm just going to slide these nests off to the side here for a minute. There you go, beautiful sourdough pasta. Very simple. Trying to make these about the same thickness all the way around so that it will dry fairly evenly. If you have extra pieces, just set them on the side. And I'm actually going to go get my dehydrator trays so I can start filling those up. working with my next ball of dough here. Such beautiful dough. I just sort of needed a little more flour into it. It's just so soft and beautiful. So I'm just pinching off pieces again, about the same size, rolling them in some flour. And I did look at the instructions for this, and it says a number 4. So on my KitchenAid, I always did a number 3. But on here, it says actually to roll them a little thinner, so to a number 4 setting for spaghetti and the linguine. So, which is the cutters that I have. So I'm going to try rolling these to a number 4. The other ones were fine. I mean, they worked out good at a number 3. But you'll mess with it, and you'll get it figured out exactly what works for you. I am not super picky about anything in my kitchen. I want it to be really practical and efficient. So I will roll these to a number 4, but the number 3 worked fine as well. So again, just sort of making them into a disc shape, if you will. Got to move my little handle back to this one, and I'm going to start on just a number 1. I'm just going to go through a number 1. If you go on a number 4 right away, sometimes it'll break your dough because it's making it out of a really big disc into like a tiny flat, and it just doesn't work out as well. So I'm going to also take this cutter back off until we're ready to do noodles. And again, just rolling these fun little discs. Kind of helps to squeeze the bottom and get it started. This really does not take very much time. And it works better with the sourdough pasta to just put your iron down and then pull it back up. You can move it some, but sometimes what happens is the sourdough is actually trying to puff up just a little bit under the heat. And so sometimes what it will do is it will smear the dough. If you're just doing regular pasta, regular egg noodles, and you're not putting the sourdough in it, then you can move your iron a little differently. It's not a big deal. You'll get onto it. You'll figure out exactly what works for you. I did want to mention to you that I did cover this with a damp tea towel while it sat on the counter for a couple hours, just to keep the top from drying out. This is the big ball of dough, 3 batches total here. So we're doing 5 total. I had 1 mixed up in the fridge. I mixed up 3, and then I had enough to mix up 1 more. So dried and it looks absolutely beautiful. So I dried it for 16 hours at 135 degrees in my dehydrator. You could also do this in your oven on the lowest setting, which is usually 170 degrees. If you don't have a dehydrator and you're not going to use your oven, I wouldn't clump them up like this. They're just fine if you have a dehydrator, but you want to make sure that it gets dry all the way through, because these are going to store just fine in the pantry just like this, because there's no moisture in them. So no mold or no bacteria can grow in those eggs because they're literally completely dry. It's like dried eggs, right? But if any moisture got into this, then it wouldn't keep as well. And so if you don't have a dehydrator or you're not going to use your oven, you can just dry them like I showed you these, and they're completely dry. They come right off the rack, and hopefully you can hear they will snap. Maybe you can't hear it, but they definitely snap, okay? Or you can do it like Ruth Ann Zimmerman does it, and she just spreads all the noodles out really thinly on a sheet and lets them dry. So you could do it that way as well. But I love it this way, and here's why. It's because I'm gonna store them in these wide mouth gallon jars. You can put these in a bag too, but the more they get handled, the more they're gonna break apart. So I'm just gonna put these little nests right down into this jar. And then I'm also gonna make some stroganoff for supper, and we're gonna cook some up, and I'll show you how they are. This one's a little too wide. That's okay. So I'm just gonna put all my spaghetti ones in one jar here. So this was about 15 pounds of fresh pasta before I dried it. I think it probably dried down to about half. So say, 7 to 8 pounds of pasta, of sourdough pasta. And in the store, that's probably $6. And who knows if it's long fermented, right? Who knows what's in the sourdough pasta that you can order online, or maybe you can get it at your local store. And so it's, $5 to $6 per pound. So if you figure 8 pounds dried, that's like about $50 worth of pasta. But again, it's homemade. It probably cost me, I don't know how much the flour cost me. Not much. I mean, probably less than $5 to make all this pasta. And it took me 2 hours total from start to finish to make, let's see, like 8 trays clear full of pasta. So that's gonna last us quite a while. So anyway, this is just how I like to do it. And yeah, I'm gonna show you how these cook up. And hopefully you'll want to try this at home. Okay, so I have my water boiling, and I'm gonna add just a little bit of tallow. You can add oil, but tallow is what I use for most of my oil. That'll just keep it from sticking. And I am gonna salt the water as well. Even though I salted the pasta, you always want well salted water to cook your pasta in. And then I'm just gonna drop these nests right into the water. And it does break up a little bit just because, being in the nests. But I still prefer to do it that way because then I can keep it into my jars. But either way, you can, lay it out flat. You can put it out on sheets. You can put it in the dehydrator flat or curled like I did, doesn't really matter. Anyway, so that is how you can dry pasta so it will be shelf stable and you can store it for many months to come. I hope that you found this tutorial helpful. If so, please hit that like and subscribe button, and I will see you in the next video.